The following presentation was recorded from a previous live event. So if you hear the presenters mention the chat box or asking for questions, this obviously won't apply for today. However, we felt that this content was important enough to share again. I hope you enjoy.
All right, so today we've had lots of conversations and you've had lots of questions about word recognition. So today is your day that we are going to dive into this critical piece of the reading puzzle. We're going to first review the domains that are necessary for skilled reading. Then we're going to dive into those domains. We're going to define phonological and phonemic awareness. We're then going to talk about phonics and a mental process that is called orthographic mapping. And then we'll learn some instructional pedagogy to improve word recognition for English learners. And here really of all the pieces is where we're going to touch the surface of these instructional practices. And then next week, we will really try to pull them all together and dive a bit deeper for you. But just, kind of hold on, sit tight. And I know we keep saying we're going to get there, but we are going to get there.
And there will be some practical application today that I'm sure everyone will be happy with. I promise. Okay, do you want me to talk about this one?
I would love for you to do that.
Okay, so Carolyn and I were really lucky in that we were able to not hang out with, but attend a fabulous session with Elsa Cardenas-Hagen, and we were pretty excited about that yesterday and today, actually. So I proposed a question and she actually answered my question during the conference yesterday. And one of the questions I asked was about what is the best way to teach English learners to read, really thinking in terms, are we talking balanced literacy? Are we talking the science of reading? What does the research say? What do we know? And so she responded, and here's what she said. She said that we have invested, and she's been one of the principal investigators on multiple studies, that we've invested about $30 million in just literacy instruction for ELs, federal dollars. I mean, which is pretty significant.
I muted you by accident. Sorry.
I'm like, did I say something? What did I say? You were trying to mute all. I get it.
I have to keep my hand on the button with her.
Okay.
Sorry.
So one of the projects in that $30 million was Project Ellipsis, and if you click on that hyperlink, it takes you to her MTSS for L's website, which has a lot of the information. But she's been really heavily involved in these investigations that have been done through the National Institute of Child Health and Human Development, as well as working with the Office of Special Education Programs, OSEP. At the federal level. So she's been involved in multiple studies that have been occurring for the past 30 years. And she said the research was really clear. The research was that balanced literacy practices are not the best way to teach our English learners to read, but the best way to teach English learners to read is to have our core instruction include the science of reading with additional structured language support. So when we teach the science of reading in core instruction, we can ensure that more English learners will learn to read. But we also need to add on that additional layer of structured language support. And so that's what's going to be really helpful. And she also offered some other suggestions. She said students need to be talking every single day, and they need to be using the language of the L2 or using English every single day. And teachers don't need to know how to speak their L1 in order to help them be more language proficient, which I thought for me was very helpful because I've already told you I only speak English and I barely do that well some days. So I found that to be incredibly helpful as well. But she said a very quick search can give you the information you need to support English learners as they're learning to speak English. So I thought I'd share this research. The $30 million was a huge message for me, a huge takeaway. We've got tons of research that really supports the idea of using the science of reading to teach all kids to read, including English learners. And so she is very involved in that work at a federal level. Okay. Hopefully that one didn't cause too much of a kerfuffle. We good?
We worked on that word today.
Oh, did you? I love that word, kerfuffle. That's such a great word.
Unit 5 in letters today, so kerfuffle was in there now.
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
So
Let's think about some of these ideas. So if you want to find in the Padlet in the session 3, there is, if you click on the advanced organizer, you can pull that up and either print it out or just kind of make note, or you can't write on it, but you can print it out and work through it, or just number your paper from 1 to however many numbers are on there.
Oh, I should have numbered them and not bullet pointed them. That would have been smart, Carolyn.
Well, every once in a while, we do have a little lapse in mental judgment, but we'll let it pass this time. So what we want to do is just kind of organize your thoughts and organize your frame of thinking right now at this moment in time around the topic that we're going to be discussing tonight. So we're going to give you about 2 minutes for you to read through that. We're not going to read them to you. We'll give you about 2 minutes to read through those statements and decide right now at this moment in time if you think each of them is true or if you think it's false. And then as we go through this session, you can use it to either confirm your thinking or change based on now you know, and now perhaps you can take this information and move it forward in your instruction. But go ahead and take a moment and think about these statements and identify whether you think they are true or false based on your current level of understanding.
We're channeling a little Bob Marzano here with the advanced organizer. But we're not going to give you the answers till the end.
Yes.
So you have to stick around with us. Amber, we know you're not going anywhere.
English learners do not need those.
I do have a question though. Well,
Sure.
so does Hagen say
Text, letter by
anything?
letter, not whole
What
letter.
happens? So like when you're in a district that does
Using
practice
contacts or
balance
pictures to
literacy.
Oh, hold on. Someone is unmuted. I'm going to mute them.
Okay.
Looking.
Go ahead.
So when you're in a district that's practicing balanced literacy, how do you kind of, combat that with the research when maybe the district is so invested into that program or that idea?
Right. Yeah, I asked that question of her, and I asked that question of Hildebrand. Okay, remind me his name.
Peltzer.
Peltzer the third. I also asked that question of him as well.
Uh-huh.
And they both had similar responses in that it is we have a duty to our kids to ensure that they learn to read. And the reason that only 35% of our students nationally are strong readers and English learner are not strong readers, reading proficiently so that's like basic grade level. So 35% of our fourth graders nationally are reading at like the basic level, which tells us we've been doing something wrong with our previous way of doing things for a while. And the reason Elsa was a little passionate about it was she said English learners are falling even farther behind that. We can't even hit the 35% mark with English learners. She said, I think it was something like 21 or 20 something. It was ridiculously low. So she said there is a moral, they both echo the urgency and the imperative to make those changes, but Achieve the Core has a guide for shifting from balanced literacy to structured literacy in the science of reading. And between Carolyn and I, one of us can get that into the Padlet for you.
Okay.
But it's a wonderful, you can even Google it, Achieve the Core. It's a guide for shifting from balanced literacy. It's a slow process, and you can have I don't want to take up too much time with it here, but you can have your district reach out to us and we'd be happy to help them. It's a systemic process. I mean, it's definitely above where many of us are, but it can happen.
Okay.
Does that help a little bit, Amber?
Yeah, I think it would be a discussion that maybe would happen at a different point in time when we had more time to hash things out or discuss. And obviously now is not that time. So yes.
But we give you some things to think about, right? And so
Well,
what I like about the Achieve the Core guide, which I'm in the process of putting in right now, is it gives you things to think about and it allows you to help make a gradual change because, upsetting the apple cart can be really, stressful. It can be fiscally sometimes irresponsible at the time to do it because you don't have time to really think through the process because it is a systemic change. But this guide really helps you think through it in a very thoughtful manner. It's also, I feel it's done kind of in a very respectful manner. or two, because you're challenging a lot of long time beliefs. You're challenging financial impact that has been put into some of these practices. So I really think that it approaches it in a really nice way, a nice, gentle way, which maybe sometimes Michelle and I don't do, but Achieve the Core has been doing this for much longer than we have. So they have a way to kind of ease you into it. So that's something to think about.
Okay.
Let's think about, but that's a good question. All right, so let's review these domains that are necessary for skilled reading, and let's think about what this means for our English learners. So we go back to the theoretical model of the not so simple view of reading. It really does underpin everything that we do in terms of our instruction, our assessment, our curricular tools. So we know that reading comprehension is the product of two domains. It's the product of word recognition and language comprehension. And Goff and Tunmer were very strategic and very intentional about the multiplication sign, because as they accumulated the 40, 50, 60, 70 years of research that they could find on this topic, they noticed one cohesive factor is that it takes word recognition and language comprehension to be a proficient reader. Both are necessary, neither on its own is sufficient. And as we further dig deeper into the research, we find that when we are working with our English language learners, we find that the code of L1 to L2 has some similarities, and there perhaps are some differences. And as we are instructing, our focus is really going to be on that phonology, that oral language development, while we are teaching that code of the alphabetic system of English. So keep that in mind. In English, we are a speech to print language. We learn to speak far sooner than we learn to attach the code to it. And so we're going to use those similarities and differences in the phonology and language as the base as we are instructing in word recognition. And so another theoretical model that really helps tie all this together, and that was the intent of the reading rope, was to see all of the strands that are necessary for proficient reading. Now, we could go back and forth between the top part of the rope, which we talked about last time, and the bottom part of the rope, which tonight. But in order to really keep us grounded in our work this evening, our focus is really going to be on that bottom part of the rope. Now, you will find in another theoretical model that we're going to introduce to you later on, we do need to access some pieces of the top part of the rope, mainly that the meaning pieces of it, the vocabulary pieces of it. But our main focus is really going to be, how do we instruct our students? And the key is teaching them how to pull the words off of the page, because there's no comprehension strategy powerful enough for not being able to read the words on the page. Okay, so let's think about comprehension though, right? Comprehension is the outcome. That is the product of what we are doing. I'm a reading specialist, not a math major, but I know enough about multiplication to know that end game, that product is comprehension. And so we know that when a student can read the words accurately and fluently, first and foremost, they can read those words accurately and fluently, then we can work with them on understanding the meanings of the words. We can provide adequate background knowledge for them, and we can teach them how to focus in on that critical content. But a critical element of comprehension is that ability to read the words accurately and fluently on the page.
And that's kind of our topic for tonight. And so that's why we underlined it, because that's where we're going tonight.
So this comes directly from Ohio's Plan to Raise Literacy Achievement via Stanislaus Dehaan's Reading in the Brain. And he tells us, as a neurosurgeon who has studied the pathways and the neural representations in our brain, that it's not true that there are hundreds of ways to learn how to read. When it comes to reading, we have the same brain, and that brain imposes the same constraints and the same learning sequences. We have specific pathways that have to be activated in order to create those ways for our brain to pull the words off the page and then understand them. And we know, and we've listened to and been reading a lot on the work of Claude Goldenberg. And he says too, that learning to read in L2 is really basically the same as learning to read in your first language. That brain function starts, when we think about the left side of the brain. So if you think about your fist, and you take your hand and you close your hand around your thumb, here's the left side of your brain. And what's happening is we see the print, we are thinking about the connections from the print to the sound, and we've got this area here that's making that connection and helping us make that connection between the print and the sounds. And then there's another pathway here that then helps with that meaning part of the equation. And so that angular gyrus is helping to connect the brain's letterbox with that phonological and orthographic processor to give us that access to the phonology and the speech sounds that those words are saying. So the brain is basically the same, okay? Learning to read is basically the same. It requires similar networks of activation. We have to have phonology and orthography. That's the bottom part of what we're going to call the 4-part processor soon. We have to be able to map letters to sounds. We have to be able to process those sounds. And we also have to have foundational decoding skills. How do we take those sounds and blend them together to make words? The difference is our English learners require additional supports in those brain regions during learning because they don't have an already present knowledge of our phonological system of English. They also don't have an already present semantic of the semantics and the meaning structures of our language. So we really do need to work specifically on those areas while we are connecting those sound symbol correspondences.
So that's kind of, if you think about a multi-tiered system of support, that's that additional layer of support we're going to give ELs. So, English learners are going to get core instruction using the science of reading, and that additional support is going to help build their phonology, which we'll talk about today, and then semantic, which was their semantic knowledge, which is what we talked about last time when we talked about the significance of vocabulary.
And remember, when we say the science of reading, remember the science of reading, we talked about this in the first session. It isn't a thing, like it's not a package program that you buy. It's an accumulation. It's a body of knowledge that we have pooled from a lot of different areas, cognitive psychology, neuroscience. We know what we know about the brain from from fMRIs. Okay, that's why we know what happens in the brain of an average reader and the brain of an unskilled reader. And we know what happens when instruction is provided to those areas of the brain. So it's an accumulation, it's a body of work, not just from one person, not from one field, but it's an accumulation of work over time. All right, so thinking about those brain regions and thinking about how we're instructing, let's kind of review a little bit these layers of language. So when we're talking about phonology, take about a second or two and type in the chat box, what do we mean by phonology? What is phonology?
Either type it in the chat or you can unmute your mic and just tell us.
Either one. Yep. I'm seeing a lot of them coming through. Yeah, it's the sounds. Absolutely. So if I say the word chat, in the word chat, there are sounds in the word chat. Ch, ah, t. There are 3 sounds in the word chat. What about orthography? I like that. The study of phonemes, the smallest sounds in the parts of language. Good. What about orthography?
And Carolyn, before you move on to orthography, I just want to clarify, because it's not letter sounds. We have 26 letters with 44 phonemes. It's the sounds in a language, the sounds in any language.
So remember, when I said the word chat, I didn't ask you to spell anything. I didn't even ask you to look at any word. I just asked you to say the word chat. And then when I parsed out the word chat, we had ch, ah, t. And then I can take ch, at, and blend it to make the word chat. What about orthography? Orthography, right, is the graphemes, okay? What about morphology?
We like to hear your voices. Feel free to unmute.
Good, I see some. What about orthography?
And Carolyn, before you move on to orthography, I just want to clarify, because it's not letter sounds. We have 26 letters with 44 phonemes. It's the sounds in a language, the sounds in any language.
So remember when I said the word chat, I didn't ask you to spell anything. I didn't even ask you to look at any word. I just asked you to say the word chat. And then when I parsed out the word chat, we had ch, at, and then I can take ch, at, and blend it to make the word chat. What about orthography? Orthography, right, is the graphemes, okay? What about morphology?
We like to hear your voices. Feel free to unmute.
Good, I see some of you putting in meaningful parts. Semantics. You're already anticipating, good. We've got the meaning. What about syntax?
Word order.
Nice.
And pragmatics.
Function.
Oh, Jean's got
The
it.
understanding of what's being said.
Problem solving.
Functions.
Yeah, functions is helpful too. Yeah.
Yeah. It's kind of how what we use in oral language, right? It's our social language. And when we think about how the social uses of language. Yeah. So thinking about different situations and how we talk depending on the social situation that they are in. That is pragmatics. Excellent. All right, let's keep rolling here. So if you want to learn more about the reading brain, and really knowing more about the reading brain really does help to solidify all this information. Michelle has an excellent talk that she gave at the Literacy Academy a few years ago. She also includes some of Stanislas Dehaan's videos in her presentation. So you've got lots of different ways to learn about the brain all in one location. And that talk is in the Padlet. So, speaking of the brain, how do we process the text? Think about how the brain. Bring up the poll or type it in the chat box.
Now I realize that some of you have already had this question. That's okay. This is going to be really critical as we move forward to make sure we've established this before we move forward. So that's why we're reviewing this poll. I know Carolyn already gave you this poll in the first session.
Okay, this is part of that retrieval practice, right?
All right. We're interleaving. You did it in the first session. Now we're doing this again in the third. We're interleaving.
We have quite a number of people who have answered in the chat box. We have about 69% have answered in the poll. I'm going to give it another couple seconds. I'm going to now, last chance for response, end the polling. Aha, a lot of you remembered. We did much, much better than we did the first time. Yeah, we process text letter by letter. Even now, as adults, as proficient readers who have established networks in our brains, when we see a word, we are processing it letter by letter and making a connection then to the sounds that those graphemes represent. We don't memorize words as wholes. And so that's why when we talk about how we learn words, we don't learn words by memorization. We learn words, our brain is going through a process called orthographic mapping. And we use a technique called phoneme graphing mapping to speed that process along. But it's letter by letter, grapheme by grapheme, sound by sound.
And that really explains why when we, look, we can read and distinguish between, oh, I was trying to put horse and house and I put them all together. So we could distinguish between this versus this very quickly because we do take in each and every letter, each and every one. Although we sometimes unintentionally through our instructional practices teach our students to do what the brains of struggling readers do, which is try to memorize whole words. And what the problem with that is it does lead to later issues with their reading and decoding. And I always tell stories of things like that happened to my kids, because my kids, luckily, they were the lucky ones and they learn to read despite the fact that they were taught a lot of whole word memorization, and they internalized the code. But even now, my son got a brand new pair of shoes, and they said on them, not a Chuck. He got Chuck Taylors, and they said on them, not a Chuck, which he used his Christmas money to buy them because he had to inform me that, Mom, these are not Chucks, they're Converse. So just so you know, teenage lingo, they're not Chucks, they're Converse. But anyways, his shoes said not a Chuck on them about 100 times. My daughter, on the other hand, looked at them very quickly and went, oh, why does Dominic have Chick-fil-A shoes? And so we see this rearing its ugly head again, this whole word memorization that she'd kind of done. And so we want to be careful, because we can unintentionally, through our instructional practices, help our kids to use the wrong side of the brain by teaching them to by forcing them to memorize whole words, which is an arduous process, but it does happen. But it ignites the right side of the brain then, and that's the wrong side for reading. So just something to think about. Okay, I'm clicking, Carolyn, I'm clicking.
Okay, so just to kind of wrap up this section, the foundation for learning to read is the same in L1 and L2. But remember, your English learners are going to need additional support in the phonology, the sounds of our English language, and also the semantics, the meaning of our English language, to further enhance those relationships. Okay, so we need to keep that in mind. We'll talk a lot about, we don't memorize words as wholes. We also don't look at words by their shape. So if on word walls or up on walls in classrooms, so if you put up the horse and the house example, horse and house have essentially the same shape, right? Knowing the shape of horse and house isn't helpful. Knowing that the middle construct of the sounds is different, that is what's helpful. Those are two different words on Michelle's screen, okay? In order to understand what those words are, we have to tap it out. We have to sound it out. And then we also have that knowledge that makes the nasalized sound, and so we cut that sound gets distorted and nasally when we say then the word ham. But him and ham look the same, but they're not the same word. Our brain has to we have to teach the brain to process sound by sound, letter by letter. Okay?
That's what good readers do.
That is what
the brain scan. This is neuroscience.
Yeah. So hey, think about this. When you teach your children, when you teach your students to phoneme, grapheme a word, to think about a word through the sounds and the symbols, you are rewiring a child's brain, and you are priming their brain for better comprehension later on. So here's what we know, right? We have to teach the 5 components of reading in core instruction. All children need to have instruction in phonemic awareness, phonics, fluency, vocabulary, and comprehension. However, we do have to provide some additional supports in the language pieces to our English learners. And today, we're going to be focusing on that phonemic awareness and phonics piece. And notice this is not a kindergarten, first grade issue. This is across the grade level issue where each grade level in core instruction has an emphasis. But if we have students who are struggling with our phonemic awareness and phonics, those word recognition skills, we have to provide those instruction and intervention settings to address the phonemic and the phonics and the decoding issues. Okay?
And by the way, this document is in Appendix F of Ohio's plan to raise literacy achievement.
Okay. We're moving on. So when we talk about phonological and phonemic awareness, a lot of times those terms get interchanged. But there is a slight difference between the two of them. But what you need to understand is that as students are learning to read, they have to be taught to attend to the units of sound and the morphemes to understand words. Because as important as phonemic awareness is, w, e, d, o, n, t, s, p, e, k, I, n, f, o, e, m, s. We don't speak in phonemes. We don't speak in individual sounds. Those sounds are all co-articulated together. So we have to teach them to attend to those sounds in order to allow for better phonic decoding. She gets distracted a little bit.
I do. I was getting ready for the like sample stuff and you know.
All right. So what is phonological awareness? Phonological awareness, I like to think about as an umbrella term, okay? It's an awareness that our speech is made up of sounds. It's also the ability to manipulate larger sound structures in words, to identify syllables and beginning sounds and rhymes and, in individual words, perhaps in a sentence. Again, it deals with spoken language, and it also includes rhyming and alliteration. And we talk a lot with our younger grade teachers, especially our preschool teachers, about rhyming. Rhyming is critical, but also don't get hung up on rhyming, especially the ability to produce rhymes, because sometimes producing rhymes really kind of falls back on their vocabulary and words they can think of on the fly. So don't get hung up on that rhyming. What's really important is when we start to drill down to the phoneme level. And remember, it's all about spoken sounds. There's no print involved. Now, we used to say you could do phonological awareness in the dark. That is not exactly true, because phonological awareness also depends on being able to see and feel the manipulation of what's happening with your mouth. So don't turn all the lights off to try and do phonemic awareness and phonological awareness, because kids really do have to see the formation of what's happening with your teeth and your lips and your tongue. They have to be able to feel their throat when they are producing sounds. So phonological awareness is the big umbrella term. It's the big parts of sounds. However, when we go from phonological awareness, word, syllable, onset, rhyme, and then eventually we get down to those little individual sounds, which are now called phonemes. And that is where we start to work with phonemic awareness. Ideally, by about middle of kindergarten, you're already starting to drill down to the phoneme level, and you're getting them to blend and segment those individual sounds in words.
And Susan Brady, she's been advocating a lot for going to the phoneme level even earlier than the middle of kindergarten, getting kids to the phoneme level by the end of preschool, and actually starting kindergarten with the phoneme level. We start with first sounds, as those are the easiest to recognize, but getting them down to the phoneme level as quickly as possible.
Because that's the building block of our words, are those phonemes. So let's think about phonemic awareness. That's a subset of phonological awareness. It's really focusing on those individual sounds, those phonemes. And phonemic awareness is the ability to segment the sounds in words. Ch, ah, t. It's the ability to blend those sounds together. Ch, at, chat. And then it's the ability to substitute some phonemes. So if I say chat, and I change the last sound from t to p, my new word is chap. I substituted one phoneme for another phoneme, and I got a whole new word.
Okay, I got my Kilpatrick out.
Got it? Okay.
I got it. Here we go.
I saw you fussing back there with some things. I wasn't quite sure where you were
I was
going.
trying to get my book ready. Okay, I'm going to give you an example, and then you guys are going to unmute and tell me, is the activity I'm doing at the phoneme level, or is it more broad, so it's overall the overarching phonological awareness? Okay, here we go. Say bookcase. Bookcase. Now say bookcase, but don't say book.
Case.
Case. Okay, guys, are we at the overarching phonological level, or are we down to the phoneme level?
Phonological awareness.
We're overarching phonological. Okay, let's try a harder one, because that was obviously too easy. Here we go. Say pamper.
Pamper.
Pamper. Now say pamper without the Pam.
Her.
Her. Are we at phoneme level or overarching phonological?
Overarching.
Overarching phonological. Okay, here we go. Let's now make it a little harder. Here we go. Say fielder.
Fielder.
Now say it again, but don't say the d.
Feeler.
Feeler. Where am I at now? Phonological awareness overarching or at the individual phoneme level?
Individual.
Phoneme.
I'm at the phoneme. Not only am I at the phoneme, I'm at what we call advanced phonemic awareness, which is really challenging for kids, but super important. Okay, let me give you another challenging one. Here we go. Say zap.
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 I'll say zap, but change the a to an I.
Zip.
Zip.
Zip. Say crate.
Great.
Now say crate, but instead of say
Great.
Great.
freight. And yes, Lisa Hegarty does this in core instruction. And it's a wonderful resource for tier 1 core instruction for all kids. I'm actually going from Kilpatrick's Equipped for Reading Success book, which these are 1-minute drills that you could use in intervention. So this is something that is EL teachers, you could use in your interventions to provide a little additional practice if your students need it on top of the Hegarty that they're already getting.
Yeah, and if you're in an intervention setting, sometimes those words might need to be further, defined, so they have a schema for the language of the sounds that they're manipulating. Absolutely. All right, so let's think about why we do all this. Well, phonology matters. It's a region of the brain. It's an area, a critical area of the brain, and the ability to get down to the phoneme level, that's really what differentiates good readers from average readers to poor readers. And we really want to get them into that good reader category. The ability to blend and segment individual phonemes, it is a strong predictor of overall reading achievement. And then that occurs in Spanish, and both for monolingual Spanish-speaking children and for Spanish-English bilingual children. And we find too that children that are phonemically aware in their native language can also be phonemically aware once they're taught the similarities and the differences between the phonemes of English and the phonemes in their native language. Okay. Students who do have these strong phonological skills, I just said that, they possess it in their second language as well. And so we want to incorporate those cross-linguistic connections, draw attention to the similarities of the phonemes, but also explicitly teach the phonemes that are different. Our English language has lots of phonemes that perhaps Spanish doesn't have. And so we have to explicitly draw that out and teach it.
And Tracy asked a question, Carolyn, about accent driven and dialects. Do you play a role in this? And if Julie Washington was here, she would go on and on about the importance of recognizing the significance of dialects. Here's what she said, which I thought was really fascinating. She said, first of all, kids need to learn to code switch. That's absolutely critical. Students who learn to code switch by 3rd grade are better readers, more successful readers. But she said there's reciprocity between strong language instruction in tier 1 and the ability to go code switch. In other words, code switching makes them better readers, but teaching them to be better readers helps them to code switch better. And so when we teach phonemic awareness, and we're modeling those sounds for our students, we're actually going to not only make them better readers, but we're going to help them to be better code switchers without forcing that. So I thought that was a really interesting conversation. She said, it's not just saying, oh, well, you have to, we have to teach kids to code switch. No, we teach kids to read. They're going to have that back and forth between reading and language. So I thought that was awesome. And does this awareness also depend on brain development, i.e. language acquisition? No, this awareness needs to be created. So I'll give you a quick overview, brain neuroscience. Every child is born with the ability to produce every sound in every language. I think you heard me say that in the first session, right? Every child is born with the ability to produce every sound, every phoneme in every language. But when we don't use it, we lose it. And so we're going to build this phonological knowledge, this awareness in our kids in order to help them better acquire this language as well. So it's going to help with reading and with language acquisition, yes.
And so for those of you who teach older students, phonemic awareness is still important. David Kilpatrick tells us that there's no statual limitation on phonemic awareness. If a student is weak and you are finding that they are weak through some kind of informal diagnostic assessment that you've given them, we have to train that because it's that training of phonemic awareness that leads to better automatic word recognition. And that's really the ultimate goal, is being able to accurately, efficiently and accurately identify words as if by sight. And children and students who have this central difficulty in reading, it really is a deficit in that phonological component. That's where we see, our dyslexic children. Dyslexia is a neurobiological disorder that has a phonological connection. And it has everything to do with underlying those sound structures in words. So being able to identify a word, identify the phonemes in a word, being able to manipulate those phonemes in the word, and then transfer it to the print on the page. That is many times the central difficulty in reading, is that phonological deficit. And unfortunately, the deficit never goes away. We can teach them, we can remediate with it, but unless we do that, they're always, it won't get any better. They don't grow out of it over time. But our word reading is dependent on phonological awareness. So in those early years of preschool and beginning of the year kindergarten, when we're working on rhymes and alliteration and syllables and first sound, that's priming the brain for later acquisition of letter names and letter sounds. And many times we're doing that simultaneously. So then if we think about what comes next, if we think about that basic phonological awareness, and we think about the ability to blend and segment the sounds and words, that's going to then lead to phonic decoding. That's where we see the graphemes on the page. We've been taught those letters and sounds, and now we're blending those letters and sounds together. But the key then is the advanced phonemic awareness with our students, being able to take all those sounds and manipulate them. And when we manipulate them, that's what leads to automatic word decoding. Knowing the difference between bit and bat and butt and bait and butte. Okay, all of that is what makes the difference to attach those sounds to the symbols. And that's how we create a sight word bank. Okay, that's what sight words are, being able to accurately, efficiently, and automatically read the words on the page because your brain has been trained to decode them. So there you go, we're done. That's a sight word.
But it does what Carolyn just said. It really explains. Someone put in the chat about a student who can say the letters in a word, but can't decode them when they see them on the page. They're not storing them by connecting those letters to sounds. And unless we connect them to letters to sounds, then we can't store them efficiently in our brain's letterbox for efficient retrieval. So that's probably the breakdown.
Activation in that angular gyrus, because that's the area that's making that activation possible. Okay, so we are about almost an hour in, 45 minutes in. Any questions? Okay, that's what sight words are, being able to accurately, efficiently, and automatically read the words on the page because your brain has been trained to decode them. So there you go, we're done. That's a sight word.
But it does what Carolyn just said. It really explains. Someone put in the chat about a student who can say the letters in a word, but can't decode them when they see them on the page. They're not storing them by connecting those letters to sounds. And unless we connect them to letters to sounds, then we can't store them efficiently in our brain's letterbox for efficient retrieval. So that's probably the breakdown.
Activation in that angular gyrus, because that's the area that's making that activation possible. Okay, so we are about almost an hour in, 45 minutes in. Any questions, comments? We still have lots and lots to tell you, so don't go away. There's so much to tell you.
I have a comment. It's crazy that invented spelling, that they kept saying the kids just invent the spelling, when they were writing. Invented spelling was kind of popular at the same time as balanced literacy and whole language, because how could kids invent the spelling if they didn't really ever?
And invented spelling is really a window into their phonological skills.
Right.
I love reading that.
Right.
Because it tells me if they're phonologically aware and if I have to remediate or not.
Absolutely, yes.
Yeah, spelling is a great insight into how phonemically aware a student is. Yeah.
So I just want to add that, that's why I kind of miss those paper pencil old screeners we used to use with our English learners. Like in our area, we use the IPT because I loved looking at the kids' writing samples because I could tell a lot about what their needs were. Now with it all online, can't do that.
Yeah. And if they're phonemically aware, now you know that you have to put the attention into the orthographic piece, and the spelling conventions is where the kind of the missing link is. So it's really fascinating. Okay, Michelle, I've talked an awful lot and I know you're chomping at the bit. So why don't you go ahead and take over with orthographic mapping and phonics.
Sure. I want to bring attention to Jill's comment in the chat because I loved it. She said newcomers in upper elementary and above still need to build that phonemic awareness in English, and she's absolutely correct. So even though we're talking about teaching in core instruction, phonemic awareness K through 5, know that you have students who are older, who might need to be taught those skills, especially with those phonemes that are not present in their L1. So they're going to need that explicit instruction in phonemic awareness as an intervention. But you're right, Jill, some of them will be able to pick it up very quickly. It really depends on their L1 proficiency and how they were taught to read in their L1 as well. So if they were taught phonemic awareness in their L1, then they're going to pick it up a lot faster as you teach phonemic awareness in English. So it kind of depends, but for the most part, you're right. They do tend to pick it up very quickly, but we do need to teach it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and Jessica was saying she's got some siblings where the one reads really well in his L1 and the other one doesn't, and they're picking it up easier.
Well, and good question of Jessica. The other Jessica, we have lots of Jessicas, said free resources. Well, first of all, the great thing about phonological awareness is there are no cute books or texts or pictures because it's oral language development, so you don't need to worry about that. So like that Kilpatrick book with the 1-minute drills, Equipped for Reading Success, is amazing. I highly recommend this. And the 1-minute drills are fabulous. And I've done these with adults. Carol Tillman talked about using those drills with a 60-year-old man who couldn't read. So at any age, absolutely appropriate. And what about kids who don't, from languages that are not alphabetic, but in order to read an alphabetic language, they need to be phonemically aware. So we need to teach the phonemes in English. We need to teach them all 44 sounds. And we're, before we end today, we'll give you some things to do to help with that and some tools that you can look at. Okay, so I think we're moving into phonics. Yes, we're talking about what phonics is and what is orthographic mapping. So we want to make sure we are clarifying the difference between phonemic awareness and phonics, because as we poll teachers nationwide, there's a lot of confusion and those terms tend to be used interchangeably. And we don't want them to be used together. They are not synonyms. They are two different concepts. So I want to make sure that there's clear understanding here. Phonemic awareness is all about what? What's phonemic awareness all about? Unmute your mics and tell me.
Understanding the phonemes.
The phonemes or the sounds. Yeah, phonemic awareness is all about the sounds. But phonics is where we take those sounds and we map them to the graphemes. So we're taking the phonemes and we are attaching them to graphemes and then teaching the rule-based system for our code. So that's phonics. We take phonemes and bring them to the graphemes. But phonemic awareness is just about the sounds. Cool. And Debbie, that is fascinating because your son, that's just so interesting. Trouble hearing the sounds because again, those weren't part of his oral language. They weren't part of his phonology. A little bit later, we're going to talk about how if you have never heard a word, so when we were doing field and we take away the d and you go to feel, if you haven't heard the words field or feel, that's really hard to do. Really hard to do. If you don't have an oral lexicon for those words, it makes it really challenging to then go down to the phoneme level and to distinguish them. So there is this relationship between that oral language and our oral vocabulary, and then our ability to learn those individual speech sounds. Okay, so phonemic awareness, sounds, phonics, sounds, and print. Are we good? I think we're talking about phonics now and that type of instruction. So why do we teach phonics? Well, because we know it's essential, it's critical. There is no comprehension strategy powerful enough to compensate for the inability to read the words on the page. So we need to teach our students to decode the words on the page. And this is not done in an embedded way. It's not done in a hit or miss way. There's a structure, there's a scope and sequence for how to do this. Otherwise, we leave out necessary rules. And contrary to popular belief, including my own beliefs at one time, English isn't crazy. I wish I had a nickel for every time I told my students English was crazy. I'd be on a beach somewhere with a very fruity beverage with a giant umbrella in it right now. But alas, I'm still here, but I have learned that English isn't crazy. It's not at all. It's complex. English is a complex, deep orthography. And so we need to teach kids the rules. Now, the good news is a lot of kids who are English learners pick up those rules really quickly, provided they've had a strong foundation in their L1. So I love this quote. Reading scientists no longer debate whether phonics is necessary and important. We know from the research that it is absolutely critical. So we have to teach phonics. The research is clear. In fact, Tim Shanahan, back in 2017, when he was visiting our state, and we kept asking him over and over again, can you please go back and talk more about phonics and phonemic awareness? Can you please go back and talk more about it? He finally said, listen, reading instruction must have phonemic awareness and systematic phonics. There's no argument here. The research is clear. And it was kind of his way of saying, we're done. Because it is considered an issue that we shouldn't have to keep debating anymore, right? We know that this is the best way for kids to learn to read. All kids learn to read with phonics. Now, some kids will learn to read without it. My 3 children are examples of children who've learned to read without it. But unfortunately, they didn't have little labels on their foreheads that tell us this. You know, so we have to, if we teach it for all kids learn to read. That's the bonus. So let's talk about how crazy English really is. Because I told you, I used to say English was crazy, and now I know that it's not. And so I'm gonna ask you to unmute here for a second. This is from Louisa Motes. Given that only blank % of English words are totally irregular, what percentage of English words are totally, completely jacked up?
7.
It's less than 7.
2%.
It's 4%. Isn't that crazy? Only 4% of English of words in English are completely jacked up. So that whole crazy thing I was saying, I was only right 4% of the time. And an example of that would be like the word of, O-F of. I mean, I wish I could give you the rhyme or reason, but I still teach it the same way I teach every other word. Don't get me wrong. But that's an example of that 4% of words that are completely irregular. The problem is, although it's only 4%, they tend to be words that are used frequently. So those are high frequency words, but only 4% are completely jacked up. Okay. So what percentage of words can be encoded exactly as they sound? Letter sound correspondences match up, perfectly decodable. It's not 96.
Not quite that high.
It's 50%. 50% of our words can be encoded exactly as they sound. And then here's the challenging part. There's another, I'll show you right here, 36% that are off by 1 letter sound correspondence. An example would be said. So said, the S and the D are perfectly decodable, but the AI is the part we need to know by heart. That grapheme represents the sound F, which is kind of irregular in English because that's not a common spelling of F. So that is the part we need to know by heart. And that's about 36%. And here's the reason that has happened. Because English, you know, it's gone through some changes. And from the history of English, unfortunately, dialectal changes have caused changes in pronunciation of some of the words. And over time, some pronunciations have stuck and some have not. And luckily, we don't change our spelling every time we change our pronunciation. Otherwise, we wouldn't be able to spell any words from one generation to the next. So that 36% is really based on these dialectal variants of words in our pronunciation over time. At one time, said was pronounced said, but over time we changed it to said. And so we didn't change the spelling, we just changed the pronunciation. Okay, do your math really fast. What percentage can be decoded based on knowledge of morphology and etymology? Thank you. For those of you good at quick math, that's that final 10%. Nice. So English isn't crazy, it's complex. And we have to teach our kids the rules, which means, guess what? We have to learn the rules ourselves. So the book that's helped me learn the rules is like the best $13 I ever spent. which was Uncovering the Logic of English. I love this book for $13. This is how I learned all the rules I didn't know. And Carolyn said, of course, it's in the pattern, because that's she's the
It's the number one question we get as soon as we show that book. It's
okay.
such an easy read too. For a while I had it by my bed, and I
too.
think my husband was going to divorce me because I was reading Uncovering the Logic of English before bed every night. So I had to move it back to my office.
I like to just look at it and like learn one little rule a day. That's where I use it. I put it next to my bed and one little rule a day. Okay, so the other thing to keep in mind is that phonics doesn't end after 5th grade. It becomes advanced word study, and we start to look then at syllabication, morphology, and etymology. And what we know is that the components of advanced word study are really helpful for English learners. So syllabication, morphology, and etymology are going to be super helpful when it comes to teaching English learners to decode, because multiple alphabetic languages have syllable types, for example. So we can make connections between those. The morphology is based on the language of origin. And so that's going to help with our cognates. So this advanced decoding is really going to be helpful for all of our English learners. Remember that we are seeing this happen in all 3 tiers of instruction. So everyone in core instruction is going to get advanced word study, but then also some of our students are going to need some additional interventions in tiers 2 and 3, especially as they get older. Okay, we got another question for you. I want you to think about this. Don't type yet, just think. What should a teacher say to a student when they encounter a word they do not know in text? So a student is reading a text and they come to a word they don't know. Don't type it yet, just think it. What should we say to the child? What should we say to the student? Okay, go ahead and type it in the chat box or say it out loud.
Oh, you guys are such great learners. We're like proud mamas.
I know, I am feeling pretty good right now. So I'm going to attach this to neuroscience. Nice. Thanks, Jessica, for bringing up those letters.
Mm-hmm.
And Lynn, I want to go beyond the first letter. We want to have them look at each and every letter because we know good readers take in each and every letter. So you might have to break a bad habit of just looking at first letters or whole word memorization, like in the case of my daughter with the chuck chick, right? I'm constantly breaking that habit with my 7th grader. So we want to have them look at all the letters because that's what good readers do, and then connect it to the sounds to sound it out. And I'm careful with the word parts even. Mm-hmm. Because it's okay to teach them to look for morphemes, but we want to be careful with word parts because in the word them, for example, is the or the. You know, so it's or he is in them, but he is not a part of them. We don't, you know, that's not a piece of that. So,
but I think some of you might be trying to get at it, and this is something that we'll talk about in just a little bit. It's really important, and we'll talk about it later. For especially our older readers, as you get into multisyllabic words, is to teach syllable types. So, Michelle, just write a random multisyllabic word. So a couple of you said when they come to a multisyllabic word, we have to first find the vowels. Okay, that's a syllabication strategy. So we see the vowel. Now we're going to make a bridge from the vowels. What do you see in between the vowels? There are consonants. What do we know now to do with the consonants? We have to split the consonants. And there are some other like little technical rules and things with the consonants. Now we're going to read the word in word parts. These are the word parts we're talking about. I've already been taught CVC words, short vowel words, im, I, im, and then the last part, p, act, impact, impact. What's that word? Impact. So that's the word parts we're looking for. Find the vowels, bridge to the consonants, split the consonants, and there's some other things we can think about with syllabication. But when we talk about word parts, that's what we're talking about with word parts.
Or morphemes. It could be syllables or morphemes. But I'm always careful with word parts because the word he, I was trying to think of an example on the fly and I was dying, but the word he is in them and that's not helping me. So I don't want them to look for a word they know. We could teach them how to break it up into syllables, or we could teach them to look for a morpheme they know, but that only works if we've taught morphemes, right? So we could teach them to look for a morpheme they know. We could teach them to break it up into syllables using their knowledge of the syllabication rules. But be careful with just saying a word part, yeah. And somebody put recipe for reading on there, which I love. That's so funny. That is the that's the intervention I'm using right now, and I love it. I think it's great. It's a fabulous little phonics intervention with great suggestions for teaching those syllable types too.
Yep.
Okay.
So we digress. Let's go.
Yeah, let's digress. So let's talk a little bit about why we want to tell our students to look at all the letters and sound it out, because that is what happens in the brain of good readers. And remember, whether you're an English learner or a student with a disability, we all have virtually the same brains with the same learning constraints, right? It's learning styles have been debunked. There is no learning style that you learn it visually and you learn it auditorily and you learn it kinesthetically. No, that's been debunked. So we know that we all have virtually the same brain with the same learning constraints. And there are 4 processing systems happening in the brain when we read. So as we offer this feedback, we want to tap into these 4 processing systems. But the thing to remember with these processing systems, and I'm going to show you on my handout here, is, so we call this the 4-part processing model, by the way. Louisa Moats and Marilyn Yeager Adams developed this based on the work of Seidenberg and McClelland. But it's aligned to the regions in the brain. What we know about this is it's a bottom-up approach. We start at the bottom and we work our way up. Where do we start, everybody? Unmute your mics and tell me. This is where I hear
at the bottom.
Work our way up. The bottom. So when we start at the bottom, we're going to tap into the phonological processor, which you know phonology is all about sounds, and the orthographic processor, which you know orthography is all about letters. So we're going to say, look at all of those letters. And we might be chunking those letters into syllables to help them, like we did with that word impact. Then sound it out. Now we're not done there. So that's my first step. Look at the letters, sound it out. I can't be done there because there are other regions in the brain. If you remember that brain slide from way back in, oh, I think I have my brain. Here it is. Here's my brain. Remember, the brain looks at letters, it connects it to the sounds, but there's also a lot of meaning happening in here. So I then have to move up and connect to meaning next. And we actually, Stanislaw Dehaene talks about this. As our brains read, the first thing we do, look to letters, connect it to sounds. The third thing we do in the reading brain is to connect to meaning. That's the third piece. So that's where we're going to check ourselves and we're going to say, is that a word I know? So that's where oral language comes in. And that's why Elsa Cardenas-Hagen talks all the time about how we have to make sure they have this great oral lexicon so that they have a word to check it and say, is that a word I know? Does it make sense here? And then my last step is, does it make sense? So look at the letters, sound it out. Is that a word I know, I've heard, and I know the meaning of, and does it make sense in this particular context? This 4-part processing system, again, based on neuroscience. So we know it aligns with the areas of the brain. We start at the bottom, we work our way up. This is empirically proven. So this is the neuroscience of the science of reading, right? We've got the studies that back up how important and significant this is. But we start at the bottom and we work our way up. And we're going to put a link to this to help you guys to give you more information. Are we good? Questions, comments? By the way, we're going to use this as our lesson plan for good teaching in just a little bit. I'm going to talk you through this in a bit, because this is also how I teach words to become sight words. In fact, I wonder before we get to the video if we should do that really fast. When I teach a word as if by sight, the first thing I do, including with my rule breakers, like with the word said, is I start with, what are the sounds in said? S, d. 3 sounds in said. Carolyn, I'm jumping the gun here for a second. The next step is I got to map those sounds to the phonology, right? So I'm going to do this 3 sounds in said. D. 3 sounds. Then the next step is I've got to map it to the orthography. I got to connect it to the print. So that's the letter S. D, 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 d. That sound is represented by the letter D. Letters don't make sounds. The sounds were there first. You could say they're spelling or representing, but they don't make them. And then we've got this sound. And this sound is the part I need to know by heart. Why do I need to know it by heart? Well, because it kind of breaks the rules. And in this case, I'm spelling F-A-I, which is a rule breaker. So this is the part I'm going to need to know by heart. So what were those sounds? I'll point. D, d, blend them together, said. So what you notice that I've done here is I've made a very distinct connection between phonology, orthography, and there's a back and forth arrow because we want to go back and forth between the two. Then I'm going to work my way up into meaning. Well, said is the past tense of say. So I say it today, I said it yesterday. So now what you've noticed is I've given you the meaning and I've used it in context. But it starts with the strong foundation down here between phonology and orthography, or our brains won't store it. Okay, now we can get you to that video. By the way, when all 4 processors are firing on all cylinders, that's when we get fluency. And if we have a breakdown in fluency, you want to back up and see if there's a breakdown in one of those processing systems in the brain. So when we teach, we want to slay the guessing monster. We don't want kids to guess. Because, I mean, I'm sure some of you have seen this where a child will look at the first letter in a word, and if it begins with an S, then you get this. Sister Susie, someone so said. She? September. Since. Socks. Shoes. And they just start guessing, right? We don't want that. We want to slay the guessing monster. We also don't want to use the pictures to guess. Pictures are not a decoding tool. Pictures, especially for ELs, can be used to help build meaning and vocabulary. And pictures serve a really wonderful role in vocabulary instruction. If you remember from last time, I had a bunch of pictures in the vocabulary mini lesson I did. But pictures are not a decoding tool. We want our kid, notice there was nothing about pictures anywhere in the brain. 4-part processing model does not have anything about pictures, right? So the regions of the brain were letters, sounds, connect to meaning, connect to context to check your work. Context is like that backup processor.
And a lot of times the kids who are doing the Susie, Sally, snowman, say, said, you know, and they're at the same time, they're looking at you to see what your face is going to say to confirm or deny whether they have that word. So the best cue, the best clue you can give them is get your eyes on the word. Look at all the letters. What do the sounds of those, you know, what do the sounds represent? And what sounds do those letters represent? And let's work from start to finish to decode this word. And if it's a longer word, we'll look at the morphological parts. We'll look for the vowels. We'll split the consonants. We'll do it that way. But the key is to train them to get their eyes on the word. And the question about using the pictures, we can help use the pictures to confirm the meaning of the word, okay? But we have to decode the word first. And the other thing is, you've got older readers, where are the pictures? They don't have pictures in a lot of those words. So that's why we're training. We have to rewire the brain, and we have to rewire them to work from what we know good readers do. They use that phonological and orthographic system. Then they use meaning and finally context to confirm the word.
So yeah, as Carolyn said, pictures can be used in vocabulary instruction. It's super helpful for vocabulary instruction, but we don't want them using it to decode. 4th grade, those pictures are gone.
Sometimes 3rd grade. Yeah, I've said that too, Dana. Do I have the word written on my face? And they're like, no.
Oh, I forgot to show you the most fun part for kids with this. We got to read the word. Said. Oh, I missed the first one. Said.
Yeah, so Lisa, that's a good question. Sometimes I do. Sometimes I interchange it. It depends. Yeah, letters, sounds, phonemes, graphemes. Yeah, that's good. That's building a more of a vocabulary connection too, right? So I really try to throw in as many, big college words as I can.
There was a question that came in earlier that says, for students who are not familiar with all letters, phonemes yet, is it helpful to supply what they do not know yet instead of having them become overwhelmed with every letter and only sound out what they do have some familiarity with? I sometimes call it sounding it out together.
I think together, but we don't want them to just try to, I guess that's scaffolding. That would be scaffolding in my mind. But we still eventually know that in our scope and sequence that we're going to want to teach them those phonics skills.
And that's where a good, and maybe this is something we talk about next week too, is what a good informal diagnostic can do for you, because that will help you really parse out what phoneme skills they have and which orthographic skills they have, so that you can better determine what your interventions are going to look like.
Okay, Carolyn, do we have time for this video?
Sure.
I don't know, you tell me, girl.
Orthographic mapping. How do children become fluent readers and writers? Well, it starts with the sight word vocabulary. This doesn't mean, though, that they should be given a set of sight words to memorize. That's inefficient, and it doesn't help them spell those words later. Instead, they build up a store of words they can recognize effortlessly without sounding them out and without looking elsewhere for cues. In fact, once they have a word in their sight word vocabulary, they can't suppress its sound and possible meanings when they come to that word again. So saying that children shouldn't learn whole words for memorization sounds counterintuitive. And in fact, I have to apologize when I ask teachers not to do this, because many of them spend hours and years even sending home sight words for memorization with the best intentions. But please don't shoot the messenger. A popular thought is that input and output should be equal. So we speak in whole words, why not input whole words? I'm afraid that doesn't work. Let's break it down and put it into perspective. As a literate adult, how many words and word parts do you think you might instantly recognize? Kilpatrick puts it as somewhere between 30 and 70,000. Now my question to you is, did you consciously memorize each one as a whole? Or did you store them in a different way? It would be impossible to consciously memorize this many words. What you actually did was use a process called orthographic mapping. Let's break it down. Ortho means correct or straight, such as in orthodontist or orthopedic. Graph, that which is written. And mapping, matching one representation to another. This diagram is intended to show the relationship between orthography, the spelling of something, M-A-P-P-I-N-G, and how that maps onto phonology, M-A-P-I-N, and then how that's stored in the lexicon, mapping. Here's the process. What you do is you look at the sequence of the letters in a word, then you translate them into possible phonemes when you're reading. You blend those phonemes to form words, and then through exposure, those sequences become unitized, leading to instant recognition. Some estimates put it at 1 to 4 exposures for typically developing readers. This in turn facilitates recall when writing. But the big question is, how come some children do learn sight words using flashcards? Well, because it's possible. It's possible to memorize whole words as wholes without sounding them out. But it's not possible to memorize all the words like that. If you want to be efficient and you want to reach as many children as possible, teach them to sound words out. This will help them learn new words, and it will also help them to spell words. At this point, we should talk about Linnea Airy. Most of her research looked at the way that children moved from learning to recognize words to self-teaching, and she came up with the term orthographic mapping to describe this phenomenon. Here are her key findings. Firstly, children who have good knowledge of grapheme-phoneme correspondences can retain words in their long-term memory with more efficiency than those who don't. Therefore, it's logical to teach these systematically from school entry. Another of her findings was that underpinning this proficiency is phonemic awareness. That's the ability to perceive the sameness, number, order, and difference of sounds in the speech stream. Therefore, assessing and intervening from school entry helps everybody. And thanks to David Kilpatrick's work, it's not hard. Next, Airy found that the crucial part of the kind of memorization we're talking about is attention to the sequence of letters in a word. Therefore, instruction that interferes with sequential observation, like whole words or the psycholinguistic guessing game, interferes with permanent storage. Airy's orthographic mapping.
Sorry, I could listen to Lynn Stone all day, but we have got to move on because
like that video, the video is in the Padlet, right? But what I really love, and Michelle stopped it right after she said it, is when we teach kids to, when we are encouraging children to guess, or we are encouraging them to read the word or memorize the word, that actually is interfering with those neural pathways. And it will take them longer to learn the words because we're teaching them to use ineffective methods. So we may as well just teach them right off the bat. And that way we can start to build those strong pathways. But yes, the rest of that video, there's actually a really neat part at the end that kind of helps you look at some famous posters that may or may not be on your wall. So take a look at that when you get a chance. It's in the
that way it comes from Lynn Stone and not from us. So when you have to pull those, when you have to pull those posters off your wall, you will not be mad at us.
I know.
At somebody else who lives in another country.
We keep way too many puppies, and we are sorry about that.
But I also want to get Mackenzie to the virtual teaching using the chips. And Mackenzie, the other thing I'll share with you is I've done a whole series on teaching virtually, and I model a lot of different strategies. And I will put that link to, there's 6 sessions of how to teach the science of reading virtually in interventions. And I can put all 6 of those sessions in the chat, the link to all of them in a little bit here. Okay, so again, going back to what I told you, Timothy Shanahan said, our kids do not have labels on their foreheads that tell us, I need phonics, I don't, I'll figure it out on my own, I won't. So if we teach the science of reading, if we teach systematic explicit phonics to all kids, they will all learn to decode. And I love this quote, it's helpful for all, harmful for none, but crucial for some. And we don't have the ability of knowing which ones are going to be okay without it. So let's just teach it to all students. And I will tell you, my 3 kids learned to read without it, but they're god-awful spellers. They are the worst spellers.
And think about it too, you're always going to come across a word that you don't know, right? So you have to have an efficient way to decode it. Okay, so you've been really good and thoughtful about putting comments and questions in the chat box. Let's just take about 1 minute to process and think about this, because now we've got some instructional implementation coming up.
I don't have anyone unmuting.
Okay.
I'm pulling up the Google site with all of those literacy interventions in a digital environment, so I can put it in the chat here too for everybody.
And then when I get a chance, I'll pull it up and put it in the Padlet. Okay. All right. We'll keep going then.
Okay. Here we go. Let's talk about the instruction that we could use every single day to improve word recognition. Oh, I got the link. How about that for multitasking? Carolyn, are you proud of me or what?
You're a wonder. Multitasking wonder.
I am. So I think we already said this before, but learning to read in 2 languages can be facilitated by incorporating similar and different skills from one language to the next. So always in our instruction, be sure to bring up, for example, and I might need you, Dana, to just unmute for a second, help me with pronunciation. If we're teaching magic E, super silent, sneaky E. So we're teaching that cape, the E, what it does is it helps the A to represent the long A sound. But in Spanish, that E would be pronounced, and in Spanish, cape would be pronounced what, Dana? Although it's not a word, but.
Cape.
Cape, thank you. So making that connection to, we know that this is the rule in your L1, but in English, this is the rule. So always bringing in making those connections whenever possible. But also when we talk about cognates, we're doing that same thing. When we're bringing in the morphemes from other languages, that's helpful too. and we know we want to build on their native language instruction to the most that we possibly can. And I thought it was interesting that she said, I don't have to be a Spanish speaker to help with that. I can do just a little bit of research and learn that. I watched an hour-long session today, and I learned so much about the syllable types of Spanish, and it didn't take a whole lot of time on my part, that now I can connect that in my instruction. So we don't need to necessarily be able to speak the native language in order to help our students make those very valuable connections. There's wonderful resources to help us with that. The other thing we need to, oh, go ahead.
No, I'm just going to say, talk about the phonemes. Go ahead.
Oh, sorry. I thought someone was asking a question.
Oh yeah, you know what? Carrie put a question in the Carrie Wibble, Carrie, one of the Carrie. We've got lots of Carries and Jessicas tonight, it looks like. But anyway, she put a question about a curriculum, and that is one thing that Elsa did say today, is that it's really about good teaching and having the knowledge of this to inform your teaching. It's not about a packaged program. So when we talk about resources like the Kilpatrick 1 minute drills or Hegarty, it's really about why, about why we're using them. Even if you have already a systematic phonics program that your school is using, it's about then knowing how to make those adjustments to attach the phonemes to the graphemes, what's present, what's not present, and how to make that connection across languages. But she didn't call out specific programs, and in fact, she said it's about the knowledge of what to do with your program, your current programs, and it's the instructional practices that you're using.
Right. Now, there are some instructional materials we're going to recommend that are going to help you. So, for example, aligned with the science of reading, there are some great interventions, but adding in the English learner piece is going to require, our knowledge of pedagogy. And there's no such thing as a perfect program. But I really do like a lot of the interventions from 95% group because they're all based on the science of reading. Brain Spring, I know someone was talking about Recipe for Reading. That's a great one. Systematic and Explicit, that's going to be helpful. Yeah, Kid Lips, thank you, Jeanette. Kid Lips really does help us to be better at teaching the articulation of phonemes. That's something I didn't know before. I wasn't prepared for that in my undergrad. I wasn't trained on how to teach the specifics of articulation of individual phonemes. And so something like Kid Lips gives us a scope and sequence to help teach our kids, but also some tools to help us be better, because high quality instructional materials matter. I also like Phonics for Reading, level 1, 2, and 3. We talked about Hegarty already. We talked about the Kilpatrick book. Someone said she needs one book to help her teachers learn about the inefficiency of memorizing sight words. I'm going to say Equipped, unless you have a better one.
Success, yeah. Another one too, especially if you have older readers, it's really good, is Rewards. It's an intervention, and what I like about Rewards is, well, one, it teaches multisyllabic words, but it also brings that vocabulary connection in too, and that can be powerful, especially for your English learners.
Absolutely. So since we were talking about using sound walls, so we have these lovely little cards here to show our students how to make the sounds, because it is about the placement. So where in the mouth, the front of the mouth, the back of the mouth, and then also what's happening with our airflow, what's happening with our tongue, what's happening with our teeth. We need to be able to help our students with this. So I've got a couple cards here, and I've got them up on the board. So we could really help our students with how to make the sounds. So for example, the vowel sounds, my mouth is always open. The important thing to know about vowel sounds is that my mouth is open. So here I have the vowel sound oi, oi, and I just actually was tutoring on this the other day, and the little girl was so excited to see that there were two mouth movements, oi, oi, when we make that sound, oi. But in English, we have 19 vowel phonemes. That's a lot of stinking vowel sounds. And unfortunately, many of these phonemes are not in other languages. And there is a great ASHA website, Dana. Do you remember that ASHA website that tells us exactly which phonemes are not? Do you have that link?
Yeah, I have it because I sent it to somebody privately on the chat who was asking for it. I'll put it in the chat. It's an ASHA site. They don't always have the developmental stages of sounds in each language, but they do have the phoneme similarities and differences compared to English for many of our languages. Not Amharic, unfortunately, though.
but it's definitely a helpful tool. I know there's a book too that's really good about that. But so, and here I happen to show you, so these are circled in yellow, are the vowel phonemes that we would have to provide additional instruction if we have a native Spanish speaker, because they are not vowel phonemes that are in Spanish. So we would want to spend additional time, for example, on the diphthong oi or the diphthong ow, which both have two mouth movements, by the way. And then here we have our consonant phonemes. Again, some of these consonant phonemes are not going to be in their native language, so I need to spend more time providing additional instruction. And it's also, consonant phonemes can be really confusing because I could have one mouth movement. So here, this mouth movement, shh, so my lips are rounded, shh, feel your throat, shh, my motor is off. It's an unvoiced sound, shh. But then when I turn my motor on, a very different sound, but the exact same mouth movement. So I want to bring my kids' attention to that, because that particular phoneme might not be present in their L1. So I need to bring their attention to it specifically and provide additional instruction. Now, one of the ones I happen to know offhand was the difference between the unvoiced ch, 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 and the voiced j, j, j. So making the connection to a sound they know, ch, 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 and saying, okay, all you do now is turn on your voice box because this sound is j, j, j. Your mouth is the same, but we're just turning on our voice box to get the j, j, j. So this is where a little bit of knowledge of the phonemes in English can be very helpful for us. But then we also then have to make sure we provide that additional instruction for those phonemes that our students don't have in their L1. I have some examples here. These are common phonemes that are in both English and Spanish. So we would review these just to show that there's similarities. Remember what we said before, build on what they know and then tell about what parts are different. So these are the sounds that are in both English and in Spanish. B, d, both of those are voice sounds. V, y, n, s, w. We're going to teach those and review them, build on what we know. But now here's some ones that are not in Spanish, so we're going to have to spend a little extra time on these. So the sound for example, which is the last sound that we hear in the word sing and ring. So Erin, I know that that was on the ASHA website, was something like that for Arabic, but also Elsa just shared it today. And I just shared the slides with Dana. She just shared it today at Plain Talk, some sounds that are not in Arabic actually. And I don't remember what they are, please don't ask me. But that we would have to spend some additional time on, and it's in one of her books.
Yeah, that ASHA site that I posted has information about Arabic, but also when I put resources together with for teachers that I meet with, I get a lot from Google. You can Google a lot of them, but the other book resource that I put in there, it's for SLPs, and it's from bilinguistics, and it's called Difference or Disorder, and it has about 13 different languages, Arabic being one of them, where it has like nice little Venn diagrams of the similarities and differences with vowels and consonants also, as well as the developmental stages. That one does have the developmental stages.
Awesome. And if I get a chance, I will share my notes from today, because I know she talked about Arabic specifically. I just don't remember exactly. Okay, so I promised that I would show some ways to do this in a digital format. So I'm going to show you these. I got this particular slide from UFly, University of Florida Literacy Institute, although you could easily make this, right? So what you have to do though, give me a second. You gotta get out. So you have to take it out of presentation mode with your students, and then you can just move the pieces. And so you can let your students move the pieces, or you can move them yourselves. But this is a way to do work with phonological awareness and then connect to phonics by using technology. So if the word was stop, I can say st, and so this is instead of those pieces, this is another option. But I also like using my document camera, I'm not gonna lie. So I still model a lot of those things, and I'll say to students, you can have a piece of candy or have some Cheerios or something handy. So I model it on the document camera using my bingo chips, or I can use these, ch, r, j. And then they can use at home, they can use whatever markers they have. I'm tutoring a little girl right now, and because I'm such a kook, I saw these on, I'll put under the document camera, on Twitter. Someone tweeted about using them. They're meant for math, but of course I bought them, and I have to use them now. And I sent it to the little girl I tutor so that we could do this together when we practice our spelling. She could say, so if the word was sheep, she could say sh, e, sh, e, p. And then she can hold it up for me to see, because I'm cheesy like that. Okay, so there you go. Does that help a little bit? Jamboards are another great tool to use. I should probably start playing my slides again because we're running out of time. Okay, so it's important to know that those phonological awareness skills, they do transfer across languages, but we need to build on what phonemes are in their native language and English, and then be sure to explicitly teach those that are not in their native language. But if they're getting core instruction using like a Hegarty or a program that's got good phonemic awareness, they are going to be getting some exposure to those individual phonemes in English through core instruction, which is super important. We know
sorry to interrupt.
That's okay.
I thought there was a pause for a minute.
No,
So somebody did mention that up there earlier. So should they work with high school students? So how much of this should they be using with high school students? And it goes back to like what Jill had said earlier, that they're going to get it quicker. So you're not going to need as much instruction sometimes with those kids, but they do need that explicit instruction and the sounds that are new in the English language to them.
Absolutely. You're never too old to learn phonemic awareness, ever, ever. And it's going to just make for great spelling and better, more efficient reading. That's how we store the words. So we want to make sure we go back and review that. But I love that Jill said that they do pick it up quicker. They've got the background, right? Okay, so keep in mind though, for English learners, it's hard to practice phonemic awareness with words that are not in your oral lexicon. So oral language really does matter. Giving exposure to a wide variety of words in oral language is going to help make phonemic awareness tasks stick for our students. And there's not an age limit on phonemic awareness. We know we could use this and might need this at any age. Okay, Carolyn, I think I have a poll to review phonemic awareness. Do we have a poll? Let's see. Did you bring it up? She did. Okay. English learners may struggle with phonemic awareness tasks and need additional tier 2 support because, which one is it? A, B, C, or D? Go ahead and vote.
We've got about half the people voting.
Come on, vote. Here's the good news. We don't know if you got it right or wrong, so just guess. We're like Planet Fitness. We are a judgment-free zone. It's just the poll. It's just called polling within Zoom. Now, I know that not all online platforms have a polling feature, so you could use other. What other ones, Carolyn, are good to use?
Yeah, there's Poll and Group, but you also have to have the paid version of Zoom.
Oh, is that what you have to have? Okay. But like you could use like Poll Anywhere. There's a couple other free polling tools that you could use.
Okay, let's go ahead and end the polling and share the results.
Oh, looks like our folks have got it. The correct answer was D. All of the above are causes for poor phonemic proficiency for English learners. So maybe they don't have the word because they struggle because the word's not in their oral language. The fact that English has 44 phonemes makes it also very challenging. That maybe they didn't get enough phonemic awareness instruction in their L1, and that is absolutely possible. Antonio Fierro talks about how in some programs, especially for learning Spanish, they only go down to the syllable level. Now they are more likely to go down to the phoneme level, but in some, maybe they learned only to go down to the syllable level, in which case we have to help them to go down to the phoneme level. And so all of these are potential causes for a need for additional phonemic awareness instruction. We can't leave this one out. It's the foundation. It's the building block for everything else. Oh yeah, Mentimeter. That's a good idea. Thanks, David. I could not remember. I know there's a lot of other ones out there. Carolyn, you want to talk about phonics for a little while? I've talked a lot.
No. I'd love to talk about phonics. So here's the thing, when we talk about phonics, phonics instruction has to be explicit. And it can't be a smattering of phonics. That's why I brought in and I mentioned the informal diagnostics earlier, because we really have to figure out where kids are in their phonics skills and then bridge those gaps. But phonics is really best taught with a well-defined scope and sequence. It's not done incidentally. There's a scope and sequence of predictable consonants, types of vowels, digraphs, blends, and really building up. And a good scope and sequence helps you to not only minimize the gaps, but also minimize overlap that might occur in instruction. We want to make sure we're starting kind of stair-stepping the skills, right? We want to go from easiest skills to more complex. We're not going to teach a kindergartner about AI and AY. Right, we're going to teach a kindergartner all about those building blocks, about all the predictable consonants, about the short vowels, how we take the predictable consonants and put the short vowel in the middle, and now we have a short vowel, a CVC word. So each one stair steps and builds upon each other. The skills are taught directly. It's not about coming to the word and teaching the word. It's about that integration of phonemic awareness and the orthography to build off of it. So we're going to do lots of practice in the sound, and then we're going to attach the symbol, and then we're going to teach about how we blend those symbols together to make those words. We're also going to be including lots of practice and lots of cumulative review over time. And we also want to make sure that we are connecting it with text. And we'll talk next time about the need for decodable texts, because it's those decodable texts that really solidify the code. Because that's really why we're reading, right? We're learning how to read these words to be able to read them in the text. But not all texts are created equal. And it's really those decodable texts that we'll talk more about next time, and why those are so important to help solidify that code. But we're accessing all parts of the processor: the sound symbol, the meaning, and then finally the context. And so when we think about our English learners, it really does need to be systematic and explicit. It needs to be that way for all of our learners. I'm going to show you something. We are going to practice something, and then I'm going to watch while you do some things on your own. And for many of our students, it's going to be, I'm going to show you something. We're going to practice a lot of it together, lots of we do. And then I'm going to have you do lots of practice while your own with some supported feedback. But we want to make sure we're teaching that sound symbol correspondence. Then we're going to move into some syllable patterns and some more complex skills. Our lessons really should be focusing on areas where those two languages diverge, rather than what they already know, right? And that's with any language. I mean, we don't want to keep reiterating things that they already know how to do. We really want to show them, okay, here are the similarities in our languages. Here are some differences that might, and those differences are what I'm going to really explicitly teach you, so that it's going to be easier to attach that work with the code. Yeah, the scope and sequence matters. Short vowels, short vowels, digraphs, blends, and then magic E. You get into vowel teams, and some vowel teams are easier than others. You don't teach a couple vowel teams together, like AI and AY. You don't teach together. You want to separate things. So it's really this logical scope and sequence. But we want to think about how this explicit instruction is occurring across the tiers, because this I do, we do, you do is going to occur in all the tiers. It's the intensity of the we do that increases as the tier of intervention increases. So in tier 1, it might be enough for some children to go through I do, and then we're going to practice it a little bit, and then you go off and you do. But in tier 2, I may have to show you a few times. We might have to focus it some with me, some with a partner in the room, and then you're going to go do some things, but I'm never going to let you do that. I'm not going to let you do that by yourself. I'm going to let you do it with some feedback. okay, to make sure that we're scaffolding those supports. And then our really intensive instruction, in addition to core and in addition to tier 2, that's where we really intensify the explicitness and the systematic nature of it. It's, I'm going to show you a few times, and then we do, you and I are going to we do it. I'm going to have you work in pairs where you do it together. Then we're going to do some more we do's as a group. And then I'm going to have you do it, but I'm going to also provide that teacher feedback so I don't let you make mistakes. Because if you start to make mistakes, that's where that's going to start to stick and you're going to keep doing things wrong. And we don't want to undo, we don't want to keep undoing the wrong. So that you do with feedback is a really critical component of the explicit nature of the explicit instruction component.
Carolyn, can you talk a little bit, because someone did ask about decodable text. I know we were going to save that topic for next time, but the importance of having both decodable text and vocabulary rich grade level text.
Yeah, so let's be clear. Decodable texts have their purpose, but decodable texts are not the only text you're reading with children. You're giving a child a decodable text because they contain patterns that you have taught. And if you give them a rich text to read on their own, there might be words that they haven't encountered the pattern. And guess what they're going to start to do? They're going to guess, try and look at the pictures. They're going to try and replace words with other words. So the purpose of decodable text is to solidify the code. But we also need to make sure that we are providing rich read alouds through text sets to build their vocabulary, build their background knowledge, and also for them to hear those complex language structures that they will encounter when they are eventually going to read those texts on their own. So remember, science of reading isn't like a program. Orton-Gillingham is a multisensory systematic approach to teaching phonics, right? There's a scope and sequence. And so, and even practitioners of Orton-Gillingham, there's lots of different scope and sequences that they follow. The important thing is to pick a sequence and follow it.
Yeah.
You also have, you can't go back and forth between different scope and sequences. You also have to remember the critical nature of a diagnostic, which we'll talk more about next time. Okay, but here's an example. I'm sorry to skip over that, but yeah, the scope and sequence is important. Pick one, stick with it, and go with it. But there's no one right scope and sequence. Even the Orton-Gillingham that Michelle and I are going through a practicum, we are using one scope and sequence. Our supervisor was trained in another scope and sequence. So it's just a matter of whatever you're choosing to use for your students, stick with that one.
So you don't leave out skills.
So you don't leave out.
And Jessica, I wouldn't say just adopt a sequence. I would say you want to adopt some instructional materials. You shouldn't write your own phonics lessons anyways. You want to have good instructional materials to follow. So if you adopt a program with some good instructional materials for that, then you'll have a good scope and sequence, but make sure it has one. I'm going to share in the chat the West Virginia phonics lessons. Those are for tier 2. They're for intervention. So that'll be perfect for many of you who are providing interventions. And they have a great scope and sequence. They're free. And so I'll share that. And then otherwise, if you ever want to, email us about some good phonics programs, if that's something you're looking for.
So Dora asked the question, should the scope and sequence be the same throughout the building? For core instruction, yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Core instruction, yes, you do need to be using the same scope and sequence. Now, with your tiers of intervention, you might need to use some diagnostic assessments to help you look at another scope to see where there might be some gaps. But yeah, core instruction needs to have all students, all means all, need to have in core instruction that same scope and sequence of skills. Yep. Yeah. Okay, so here's how phonology, phonemic awareness meets morphology. This was a lesson that was done in a Canton City classroom and with Tracy Smith, and she was explaining to her students all the different sounds that the suffix ed makes. The suffix ed makes 3 sounds. It makes the t sound, it makes the d sound, and it makes the ed sound. And she was explaining and systematically and explicitly teaching her students when we're going to hear the ed suffix make the t sound, when it's going to make the d sound, and when it's going to make the id sound. This is one of these times where English isn't crazy, right? That suffix has a rule pattern to it, and it has to do with the voicing and the unvoiced sounds at the end of a word, and it has to do with the grapheme that's found at the end of a word. So that's just a way that she was using very explicit. She made an anchor chart, right? And she's got that up for her students too. She's taught it. They did some practice with it. And now as they work on their own independently, now they have a frame of reference after they've been taught on when to use and how to pronounce ED, and then how to spell that ED ending. Okay. Just some strategies for teaching letter knowledge. We're really coming to the end of our time, but this is a slide that is in your handouts. Just, make connections. Again, we're back to that. Make connections between home language and English. Teach the names of the letters. Recite the alphabet. Draw attention, though, that LMNOP isn't one letter. It's LMNOP. And be aware if they start to have some confusion between letter names and letter sounds. And we can talk more about how we teach letter knowledge, and that alphabetic principle. We'll bring that into that final session on kind of bringing it all together. Okay. This is an activity, not an activity, I guess. It's a strategy that we use. It's called phoneme grapheme mapping. And it really is a way to help draw attention to the individual phonemes in words and the graphemes that they represent. Okay. So are you bringing this up on your dot camera, Michelle?
I got it.
In the day, we may have called them Elkonin boxes. Sometimes we call them sound boxes, but the principle is phoneme grapheme mapping. And so you see on Michelle's screen, she's got these boxes. And so it's a great way to teach spelling. So let's say we were working on the sh pattern of SH, the digraph SH. And so we might say to our students, okay, we're going to spell the word ship. Say ship. Let's tap the sounds in ship. Sh, I, p. Now, Michelle, I want to see you map the sounds in ship. How many sounds are in the word ship? There's 3 sounds. So I should have how many boxes? 3 boxes. Now, Michelle, what's the first sound in the word ship? Shh. And what grapheme represents the sound sh?
SH.
That's right. We learned SH represents the sh sound. What's the next sound in the word ship?
I.
Good. And what grapheme represents the I sound? Yeah, like itch. That's right. We've got that letter I. And what's the last sound in ship?
Ship.
Right. That last sound is P. And what's the grapheme?
P.
Excellent. So now write that word and let me see and hear you blend the word ship.
Ship.
And what was that word?
Ship.
Excellent. That's phoneme grapheme mapping. There is another excellent resource, and I know you're going to ask me to put it in the chat, and I'm going to put it in the chat, and I'm also going to put it into the Padlet for you. It's called Phonics and Spelling Through Phoneme Grapheme Mapping. And if you pair it with Logic of English, it is the best resource you could ever imagine. Mine is so used and worn, it's about ready to fall apart. But what it does is it gives you all of the graphemes and it tells you how you map them. So like that tricky QU or the magic E, when you have to delete delete a grapheme to add the ED, it shows you what to do with those. It is absolutely fantastic. It is the best resource. Now, I am going to kind of give you a disclaimer. Do not buy it on Amazon. Because what happens is sometimes people buy it and they resell it for about 5 times as much as it really is. So I will put in the Padlet the name and also where you can purchase it.
It's going for 118 on Amazon, and that is not the cost.
I think it's like $40. I mean, it's not cheap, but it's not 118. I think it's like $40 if you buy it through Voyager, which is, I think, the publisher. So
Yep.
I would definitely.
Yeah.
Carolyn, I'm just going to show a few more words just to show the phoneme grapheme mapping. So this would be like, for example, cheese.
Oh, yeah.
But I just want you guys to see each box represents a sound. So for the word nurse, it would be nurse, 3 sounds. And by the way, if your students ask why is there an E at the end of those words, there's an E at the end of nurse and cheese, so that we can distinguish that this is a singular noun, because a noun that ends in an S in English is plural. And so this is a way for us to know that these are singular nouns.
Yeah, so when you're talking about letter knowledge, letter sound knowledge, E is a letter that works really hard in English. E actually has lots of jobs. Okay, so Michelle showed you how to map the word said a little bit ago. This is a series of videos that also kind of in a cute way show that same principle. We call them heart words. They are words that we need to keep near to our heart, but before they can really be attached to us in our heart, we have to learn how to spell them through that mapping process. And so there are parts of those words that are completely regular, like from, and the part that's irregular is the O, and we draw attention to that by putting a cute little heart above it. That way it helps us remember that the rest of the word is decodable. We just have that part that needs to.
I was gonna play, can we play just a second of it, Carolyn, or no? I don't know if we have the time. Probably not, huh?
Maybe just do it just real quick, and then we'll wrap it up. We'll get to.
Let's examine the word should, as in you should not throw your food.
Should rhymes with words you know, like could and would. Let's see if we can figure out which parts of should we know and which parts we have to learn by heart.
Should has 3 sounds, sh, d. The first sound, sh, is spelled with the digraph sh. The last sound, d, is spelled with the letter d. We can read these parts using our phonics knowledge.
The middle sound, is spelled with the letters O-U-L. We use 3 letters to spell one sound in this word. This is the one part we have to know by heart.
Okay, you guys get the idea. Moving on.
And then there's tap it, map it, graph it. There is a link in the chat or in the Padlet to the UFly app. It is a virtual blending board. So while Michelle was showing you how to write the grapheme patterns on her sound boxes, this is an app where they can drag up the graphemes to create words. So it's a virtual blending board. It's really, really neat. It's a nice complement to the tiles. Yep.
Trying to just do something really fast just to see, but your students can do this on their end and you can do it on your end to show them. And that series I showed you on teaching interventions in a digital environment, I kind of take you through all of these so you can revisit them. Oh my gosh, Carolyn, I didn't even look at how late it is.
I know.
Okay. Because we're not getting to advanced decoding, which is so good. But
I'll tell you what, it's something to kind of keep you coming back for next week, right? And we promise that we will talk about advanced decoding because we know many of you do have older readers. And what we do with our older readers essentially is the same, but we really have to accelerate them. We've got to accelerate them, right? And double accelerate them to get them where they need to be at grade level. And so we do that by teaching syllable types. And syllable types combined with morphology can really be a window and an opportunity to read those critical